We are going live. We are promoting the episode, the brand new episode on the Live Beyond the Norms podcast of Suzanne Robotti. She is an FDA advisor. She sits on some drug panels. There she is. Let's see if we can get her to... Normally, it starts ringing as soon as I invite you. Okay, it looks like you've joined. Let's see.
Am I sideways?
You are there. You are sideways. Maybe rotate something?
Nope. Okay. This way. Got it.
Awesome. How are you doing, Suzanne?
Better than now that I'm not sideways.
It's a lot easier to talk when you're not sideways.
This is a little precarious because I didn't expect to be sideways. So we'll be fine.
If it falls, we'll just pick it right back up. So excited, your episode, The Hidden Dangers in Your Medicine Cabinet, FDA Advisor Suzanne Robotti. Am I saying that right? The second time. On flawed trials, drug safety, and patient advocacy. I was so looking forward going into it because just the concept of being able to talk to somebody who's sat as an FDA advisor, it's not something that, the average person gets to do, although everyone around you gets to do that because you are that person. Talk a little bit about how that came to pass. Like, what is the path that led up to you kind of sitting on an FDA advisory board?
I actually took a course on how the FDA actually functions, and it was the first time that I realized that the drug has advisory committees of independent scientists and consumer representatives. And they don't call that for every single drug that they review, but they do for any drug that has an efficacy or effectiveness and safety balance question, or if the data isn't quite clear to the FDA and they want some outside counsel on it. So that's what the advisory committees are for, and there are many advisory committees, maybe as many as 50, because we are all in categories. So there might be a drug advisory committee for vaccinations you've heard so much about recently. You've heard about drug advisory committees for cancer drugs, for pregnancy drugs. I was on, for 7 years, was on the advisory committee for drug safety and risk management. And we're brought in when there's a particular safety issue. And it's intimidating because you're in a room with maybe 20 other scientists who have PhDs and PharmDs and MDs and a lot of Ds going on there. And my only D is for I feel dumb, but I'm not dumb. What I am is I'm not a scientist. I was not trained as a scientist. And that's important because when you're trained as a scientist or a doctor, you're trained to think a particular way. And I was brought in to think a different way. I'm brought in to think about, if I took this drug, could I go to work? Or am I going to get better but be bedridden? Am I going to, or the side effects going to be so bad I can't go to work? So that drug isn't going to help me very much.
So there's been a number of changes. You kind of mentioned some advisory boards have shifted, I believe,
Yes.
and you may be in no position to comment, and I would respect that if that is the situation. So I believe that Robert F. Kennedy kind of just got rid of everybody who was on the vaccine advisory committee and is ostensibly going to replace them. Any thoughts on that? Like, what is your opinion, if you're allowed to have one, since you are on a committee?
Well, I actually termed out last year, although I applied to be seated again.
Yeah.
Whatever the phrasing is. I do have an opinion. The advisory boards the people who go on the advisory boards are well vetted. They are researched, particularly the Vaccine Advisory Board is one of the very most important boards. And there's a couple of levels of boards in there and it gets technical. But the Vaccine Advisory Board is one of the most important because when a vaccine is approved, the entire population may have to take it. So there will always be people harmed by anything. People get harmed by drinking too much water. So you are really, in that case, balancing the benefit to entire society, the benefit to individuals, and the harm, which there will be harm. Unfortunately, there always is with every drug. So it's very important that the experts on the vaccination board be very experts, that they really know what they're talking about, that they have clinical experience and academic and research experience. And so he took off, he fired a lot of people. There's a natural turnover. You can only be on any advisory board for 7 to 8 years, depending on when you're appointed, and you have to go off anyway. but instead he tossed off everyone, which means all of the history of the past 5 or 6 years and the thought process of those decisions is gone. You're starting with a new group who don't know each other, who have no cohesiveness or process in place. So I think that it's very problematic. I don't believe in throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, so one of the things I've heard that kind of my first thought, because there's a lot of excitement, certainly in the biohacking community, Robert F. Kennedy is shaking things up. And clearly, I think, a whole lot of things needed to be shaken up really everywhere. I think that's kind of true. And then the first kind of person speaking out about it was like, hey, these are heavily vetted scientists. Like, they've got the credentials, they've got the scientific focus. And I was like, man, that sounds like it was a really bad idea. And then I did hear one thing, and I don't know if this one is true. Like, I believe that they were heavily vetted scientists. But the next one was like that board hasn't rejected a vaccine ever. Now, I don't know if that's true. But if that's true, like, it needs to be shook up. I don't know if you have an opinion, if you know the answer to that. Is that true? Like, if you have any opinions kind of around that.
I don't know that that's true. I would have to check it out. It could be true, could not be true. I can tell you by the time it comes in front of an advisory board, it's been very well checked out. It is the last step before approval. And it generally doesn't come before an advisory board unless the FDA is pretty confident of an approval in any case. And when it comes to vaccination, again, that's a step heavy dutier than any advisory board I've been on, even though it's got the same level and name that my advisory board has. But I can tell you that these are practitioners and carefully thinking people. Not every vaccination gets approved for every person to take, and part of the vaccination evaluation process at the advisory board level and before is who takes this vaccination, who cannot take this vaccination. So when I throw off the phrase, everyone's going to take this vaccination, that's not always true. It might not be approved for pregnant people. It may not be approved for the elderly. It may be only approved for the elderly. Things like the shingles vaccination. You need to be 50 years or older, or the benefit is not there. So there's a lot of subtlety that goes on this, but that's a little concerning. I'm going to look that up. I have trouble believing that.
Me too, right? Like, that's one of the reasons I'm very clear. If it's true, then that makes me really nervous. It seems unlikely to be true if there were vetted scientists. Like, the reality is 100% approval is not something that you would hear out of vetted scientists unless they were influenced, which is one of the things that we're concerned about is, are these scientists influenced by, whatever so-called big pharma? Now, you said the way that you got into FDA Advisory Board is you took a class. That doesn't sound normal. I'm just going to take this class to see. I know you have, and we really talked about, dove into your experience that brought this to a head for you, which is two experiences, right? It's not just, a drug that your mom took. It's also an experience with ADHD. Can you talk about those a little bit, please?
Well, my mother was prescribed a drug that was approved by the FDA when I was in utero, when I was a fetus, and it was supposed to help her not miscarry. It was a drug that had been poorly researched and should never have been approved, and it did not do that. It actually caused harm to many of the fetuses, male and female. My particular harm was that I'm infertile because of it, which is ironic. It's supposed to help you have a baby, not keep you from having a baby. But if you want more color information on that, we have a podcast that's coming out tomorrow.
Yeah, a lot of details about why it shouldn't, the fact, I think in the UK it wasn't available and all sorts of that. That's really
exactly.
good. So, and then your next experience,
Right. And so then what followed up on that, many years later, my nephew came to live with us. We were his guardians, and he was a rambunctious. He came from a difficult home at the time. So he was acting out. And the school that we put him into, he was 12. School immediately said he had to go on ADHD drugs. We thought that was a rush to diagnosis, and ultimately he never got the ADHD drugs because, not in large part, not in small part, because I asked the question, what are the long-term effects of taking a mind stimulant on a 12-year-old boy hitting puberty? And there was no answer. And the answers are only just becoming clear now. They're really not out yet, but they're long-term studies that you need to have to prove that only coming out. And this is 20 years ago. So we had to work. We were fortunate that we had the time and could take the effort to work with him and develop the skills he needed. But again, I go more into that story in the podcast. But it's important. What I learned there is that if the diagnosis doesn't feel right to you, you can ask for time. There's almost never a moment where you can't ask for more time to think about it, do some research, get a second opinion, try to work things out a different way. And the medical opportunity is always there for you if you decide to take that. It's not a bad thing. ADHD drugs can be a lifesaver for some kids. It just turned out that our kid didn't need it. He needed a lot of discipline and training.
Yeah. Well, so my kids were diagnosed with ADHD, I don't know, maybe at 5. And I have a lot of conversations with people who some of their experiences put them in a unique position to ask for the questions, right? So your experience with DES and awareness and it is like you just have a clear and concrete impression. It is not true that all drugs are safe, right? Like, it is not true that all drugs are going to do exactly what you think. You know this going into this conversation with your nephew, and it just is a more empowering position. And I think it's a strong part of the message of the podcast that when you listen to it is like, hey, again, and I hear this over and over again, or the theme comes up of being the CEO of your own health, and in this case, even the health of your nephew.
There is a line to draw there. Doctors have training, experience, knowledge. So I would never reject a doctor's recommendation out of hand. Just like, no, you're wrong, and walk away. But I would say I need some time to think about it. I would like a second opinion. It doesn't feel like the right answer to me. Even with the cancer diagnosis, there's always time to do more. But I do take a doctor's recommendation very, very seriously. They're an expert.
Yeah, I think that's really important. If anybody wanted, so maybe they've had a similar experience, or maybe they are just listen to this episode and they're like, hey, I'd like to be an FDA advisor. What does that path look like? You mentioned a course. Like, is there an easy way? Is this a challenging process? What does that look like?
It's a little bit challenging, and it should be. What had happened in between these two events, when my lovely, wonderful kid went off to college, I decided I wanted to do something with the rest of my life. And I decided that if there was one thing that I could do, it would be to make sure that there would never be another DES. I wanted to influence policy and decisions. I wanted people to know that you have options and choices with your medicines, and that you can ask questions, and that to not just assume that every medicine is a net benefit. There are side effects, and you're going to have to live with those. So I started a journalistic website, journalism and advocacy, called Med Shadow, MED like medicine, shadow because drugs will follow you. .org. It's a nonprofit. We don't take any pharmaceutical money. And so the general population there can go and learn about ADHD medicines or statins, or, what are the side effects? How can we manage the side effects if you take the drug? In the course of that, I met a lot of really smart and wonderful people. And one organization, National Center for Health Research, received FDA funding to find patient advocates to teach them about how the FDA works. That was the course I took. So what you have to do to be a consumer representative, you have to find a committee that you would be a good fit for. You have to write the application. And what they look for is somebody who can read and understand scientific research papers. They're very complex. They're very difficult. Has some basic science understanding, but also is very connected with patient advocacy and community groups, so that I have the ability to go out and find out what patients in that area really want, what advocates are asking for in that area, and bring that to the table. Because the doctors reading the same reports are going to delve deeper than I can. They'll bring the technical expertise. I bring the patient experience.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a concern, right? And I'm not sure that we addressed this on the podcast. It would surprise me if we didn't touch on it, but generic drug safety is a concern that's popped on your radar. Talk about your concern there, and I'll be throwing the link out there. You've got a resource for people.
Yes. So I recently, last summer, I heard about an FDA decision. When generic drugs are approved They have to be approved like brand name drugs, but they don't go through the deep testing that brand name drugs do. And brand name drugs don't get enough testing the way it is. We've talked about that on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
They need to do more testing and more follow-up testing. But generic drugs have to file paperwork with the FDA to show that they are bioequivalent, that they will act the same way in your body as a brand name drug does. So if you're taking a brand name statin and you want to switch to a generic, you shouldn't feel much of a difference. 92% of the drugs that Americans take are generic drugs. Almost all the drugs you and I take are generic drugs. And more than 80% of those drugs are not made in America. Actually, more than 90% are not made in America. In many cases, the majority of cases, the primary ingredient is made in China, the secondary ingredients are made in India, and then it's pressed together and sold in the United States. Not a bad thing necessarily, but the FDA does not have enough investigators to inspect the facilities that they're made in. And so we are, in some cases, getting sub-quality generic drugs into the country. The FDA catches many of them, but not all. You want to ask me a question? Yeah.
One of the things that I'll be honest, I'm a little shocked when you say the generic drugs need to prove they will not feel much different. I think in everybody's mind, at least in my mind, the generic drug was the exact same thing, so they shouldn't feel any different. Is there a margin of error that we're not aware of? Talk about that. Wow.
This is a little bit of capitalism gone crazy. The actual formula for a brand name drug is trademarked or patented. And so if you are a generic drug manufacturer and want to make a generic copy of, let's say, Ozempic, which you will not be able to do for another 7 years because their patent is in place, but you don't get the formula for Ozempic. You have to break the pill apart and chemically figure out what's in there, in what proportion. It can't be identical. It has to be a different color. So you're putting a different coloring agent in there. And all the secondary ingredients you're kind of guessing at that make it release at over a certain time frame. Actually, Ozempic is an injection. It's the same thing with that. So there's a little bit of guesswork and testing that goes on. So there's a testing facility. I realized they happen to be in India because a lot of the drugs are, put together in India. And the FDA looked through their notes and said, "Oh my gosh, these are clearly faked and forged." Those are the words the FDA used: faked and forged testing documents that got us to approve new generics. And over the past number of years, they'd approved 400 mostly generic drugs tested by that facility and never tested again. And said we have to reject all of them. None of them are bioequivalent. Then the FDA made the insane decision that we will not tell the public what drugs those are. So you might be taking a generic drug and you don't know. It's no longer considered bioequivalent. And we actually have a TikTok and an Instagram that shows you how to look it up in something called the Orange Book, because there's other drugs that are out there that are no longer bioequivalent. So that's a problem. What the message I would like people to know today is that if you're taking a drug on a regular basis, like an ADHD drug, for example, or a statin, and you get a refill, even the same generic to the same generic or a brand name to a generic, and you feel that drug either is working badly in your body, it's giving you weird rushes, or you have new side effects, or it's not working at all, don't listen to your doctor when your doctor says, I should never say don't listen to your doctor, but there are many doctors who don't realize that there are non-bioequivalents out there and that some generics just have a bad batch out there. So you need to advocate for yourself. You need to go to your pharmacist, ask for a different refill from a different manufacturer, and you can go listen to our webinar for free that's in the notes that introduces this topic. It's a series of 4 webinars, and I got to say the first one's a little bit scary because these people are really into the subject of the generic non-equivalency. But it comes down to maybe 15% of the generic drugs in our marketplace are probably sub-equivalent, meaning they have too much of the drug in it, too little of the drug in it, they don't release at the right time. It's a small amount, but 12 to 15% ends up being a lot if you're taking a drug every single day. You could be at risk, so be careful.
Yeah. Well, even one of the people who was tuned in, Just Winifred, said, I feel a difference between levothyroxine, I'm sure I'm messing that up, and Synthroid. I kind of did a quick search.
Yes. Yes.
Synthroid is the brand name version of the generic drug levothyroxine. And so there's an example. Like he feels a difference, he or she feels a difference, pays the ridiculous difference that the insurance doesn't cover. Wow. This is now I have homework. You're giving me homework. Please don't give me homework. I have so much homework.
Here's a cheat for you. We did a social media posting, or our senior editor did, Emma Yosinski, but it's on MedShadow, both Instagram and TikTok. And she talked about ADHD medicine specifically because we wrote an article about it on the website. And in the TikTok video, she says that she's heard that a lot of people with ADHD medicine specifically are feeling a difference between the generics that they take. We're not that big on TikTok, but in TikTok, I think at more than 300,000 views. We have more than 600 comments just on ADHD drugs. Some of them are videos of people saying, yes, my doctor says it can't be so, but I can tell when the manufacturer is different on my generic. So it's a thing.
Okay. Well, you know what? I haven't even pasted it. Let me paste this right now. This is the webinars on demand that you have. So anybody tuning in, and we will rerun this. The webinar's free. And when we rerun it, we'll include that link. Wow, that's okay. You know, I'm shocked, and at the same point, you know, at the end of the day, not surprised. Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, I think we covered a lot of stuff, but I want to touch on this. So by the time a drug has gone live, we all understand drug companies have spent millions of dollars to get that drug approved. And at least I have this picture that, you know, tens of thousands of people this has been tested on, and it's been tested on them for months or maybe even years. Is that the reality?
No. One of the things I learned sitting on the FDA Advisor Committee is that by the time it comes before us to be approved or not approved, at most 3,000 people have ever taken that drug. And at most, if they've taken that drug, it would be for 3 to 6 months at most. This includes drugs that are meant to be taken by 100 million people versus 3,000 people. This includes drugs that are meant to be taken every day for the rest of your life. And only for 2 months, 3 months are they tested for. So here's the takeaway from this. If you see a drug being advertised on TV, try not to ask for it because it's probably a new drug and we don't know that much about it. When your doctor prescribes a drug, ask for the old drug.
Well, the point is well taken, yes.
They have a longer safety profile and doctors have a much more experience with them. So if you need the new drug, take it. But if you can use an older drug, you're saving yourself some risk that you really don't need to take.
So the picture that we have is not what's actually going on. So that's one thing. It's not what's going on when you think about generics versus the name brand. Like that's something, and again, the webinars are out there. And I'm going to throw in this one thing because I think we touched on this, which is in my mind, and I think a lot of people out there think of drugs working kind of like antibiotics, which is, it's a binary thing. You have something and then you take the drug and then you don't have the something, which is almost always true of antibiotics, right? Have the bacteria, take the antibiotic, no longer have the bacteria. And that's amazing. But the efficacy of most drugs that are tested, it's not like 80%, it's not 70%, it's not 60% efficacy. The number is surprisingly low. And if you want to hear us talk about that, you got to go check out the episode. And again, the episode is titled The Hidden Dangers in Your Medicine Cabinet, FDA Advisor Suzanne Robotti on Flawed Trials, Drug Safety and Patient Advocacy. Yes, Suzanne is an FDA advisor. Do you have anything to add before we kind of wrapped this up?
I do. I want to assure people that medicine saves lives. I don't want to talk anybody into not taking medicine that they need. So we live much longer today because of our good medicine system. But always ask about the side effects. Ask for the older drug and prepare yourself for the side effects because you'll be able to tolerate the drug better in that case if you need it.
Excellent. All right. and I'm gonna post this link so people can connect to the podcast in general. Oh, Queen of Biohacking joined in. Hello.
Somebody asked about placebo-controlled double-blind trials. Yes, the FDA demands only the best quality research. Does that make it perfect research? Definitely not. There's just not enough people in it. It's not powered strongly enough, and more power means more people in the research.
And then Jess Winifred talked about 2 autoimmune conditions convinced brought on by amalgam mercury fillings. Hopefully you've had those removed. Yet there's a lot of talk, certainly in the biohacking community, you talk about biological dentists. Even my dentist, last time I went, he started working on this tooth. He's a good friend of mine, but he didn't even tell me. And he pulled out the amalgam filling and then put in, an epoxy one. So those are some concerns, and I know a number of people who have had a lot of concerns. All right, you can find the episode of Suzanne's episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. I've put the links in there. It's on YouTube. Make sure to go check out her webinar on generic drugs and the concerns you should have with generic drugs. I think I would just say, good, Winifred had them removed. I think it would be good to, I think one of the messages here, right, through all of this and through all the stories that you share is be that advocate for your own health. Be that CEO of your own health. Get second opinions. Doctors are very experienced, hopefully, and certainly very educated, and they have opinions, but they are not you. You need to advocate for you. Does that sound fair? Would you add anything to that?